Hi everybody, I'm Rick Levine and we're here to talk to you today about digital rights management and standardization. Can everybody hear me okay? A little higher. Can you guys turn me up a little bit? Because I'm going to blow out here on the verge of laryngitis. We have a great panel here. We're here to talk to you about digital rights management and standardization related topics. We had really, I think, a good prep call. I've never actually been on a panel that had a prep call before. So therefore, any prep call is a good one. And what we discovered, I think, is that in a lot of respects, we're on the same page. And that's great because now we'll be picking on you. I work for Accenture. I'm actually formally in security practice. I'm an encryption and security expert. But the hat that I wear, sort of customer facing, is as the rights management lead for media and entertainment globally. So I'm not bounded by geography or apparently sleep. We've got some great people here. We'll go through the panel. I think you're going to have fun today. And I'm going to structure this a little differently than a lot of other panels. Go, sir.
First, thank you all for coming. My name is Don Lake. It's spelled right on the card. It's just pronounced differently. I'm with IBM Research in Yorktown, New York, and I lead IBM's involvement in the 4C and AACS groups, which do encryption content protection technology for optical disks and SD cards. I also represent IBM in Digital Network Alliance, DLNA, and also in the DVD forum.
My name is Henry Josephowitz. I'm with Gibson Guitar. We have a new digital technology that we've been working on for quite a long time. It's Ethernet-based. It's gotten us into network topologies and eventually gotten us into a lot of standard setting processes and committees, IEEE and so forth. And we are promulgating a scheme, for a new music format at this point.
Hi, I'm Sean Dwani. I'm here in replacement, actually, of Talal Shamoon. He got a little under the weather. And I'm the VP of Licensing for Intertrust. And Intertrust is a DRM company that's been around for quite a long time and has a number of IPRs in this area and involved in two standardization efforts called Marlin and Coral. Thank you.
My name is Tom Jacobs, and I'm Director of Research at Sun Microsystems Laboratories, called Sun Labs. And one of the things that we work on there are broadcast and streaming video technologies, but the current focus is a new approach to doing digital rights management, and we're a little bit different in that we're focusing on it being royalty-free, so not just Sun technology, but outlining and legally specifying an approach to doing it without being encumbered by other people's intellectual property, as well as it being open sourced and fully specified. So we started an effort just about a year ago called the Open Media Commons, and have contributed now all of the source code around the research project called DREAM through that community. So we think that there's some interesting things to be done with DRM, especially, and as described here already, there's a commonality of opinion that content ought to be licensed through identity as opposed to being locked up to devices. So we'll talk more about that.
My name is Jonathan Lee. I work with a company called Media Defender. I run their business development department. Historically, our core business is in anti-piracy on the peer-to-peer networks. Our technology is designed to frustrate users from downloading what they're looking for. Recently, I'd say in the last year and a half, we've been using our technology as an alternative means of distribution, marketing, and promoting to peer-to-peer users, in which DRM becomes, it's the forefront of what you can do.
Hi, my name is Mark Henninger. My company is DreamTank, and we are a data center that secures and codes and stores and delivers content to the end user and to large subscriber networks. We're we're the technology company between the content provider that can take the content and package it, make sure it gets to its final destination, whatever it may be, whether it's an MSO or an end user.
That was great. What we're going to do for the rest of this presentation, and it looks to me like we have a little more than an hour, so I think we've got plenty of time to do this right, is unlike a lot of other panels where we all talk and then at the end we let you talk, I'm going to try to break this conversation down into 3, 4, maybe 5 segments, and we'll involve the audience at the end of each one so that you can hear from each other earlier on, and that might fuel a better discussion. At the end, we'll open the floor if we manage our time properly, and then after that, we'll adjourn to outside those doors and we can continue individual discussions. The connections that we make here are pretty important to both the people on the panel and you in the audience. Before we start, I want to ask you some questions to help us understand you. Now, you're not the typical audience, right? You're not consumers so much. So, for instance, a show of hands kind of questions. How many of you believe content should just be free, unlicensed? Did I hand? Okay. No ponytail, no tie-dye shirt, didn't think so. You paid $600 to get in, so you probably don't mind paying for things. How many of you have at least one MP3 file somewhere that was not paid for properly or have distributed a few? Don't worry, we're not turning you in, just hold your hands up. This is a keep 'em up. Okay. How many of you actually steal other things in your life on a regular Okay, well,
security.
Turn the camera on. Let's start this again. Put your hand up if you have an MP3 file, keep it up. Put your hand down if you steal other stuff normally. Okay, that means that you are a typical consumer where you tend to steal these things but not much else, and that means that you're a candidate to buy them. And that's an important thing. I used to be, and I imagine probably Jonathan used to be as well, of the mind that they're thieving bastards and we're going to get them all. It was very hard for me to break out of that model and think of them as customers, but they are, and in fact, we all do it. And we all need to not do it. We all need to buy things properly and become each other's customers in the rising tide that raises all boats kind of concept. All right, how many of you, this is going to come kind of the thing where you keep your hand up. How many of you have an iPod, an actual like Apple iPod? How many of you have Apple CRM Fair Play Protected Content on the iPod? Keep your hand up, otherwise drop it. And for those of you who have your hand up, how many of you are okay with the fact that you can't play that content back on somebody else's hardware platform? Put your hand down. Sorry, I flipped around there. So you are, those of you whose hands are theoretically still up, are early adopters who bought technology from a pioneering company that did a lot for us to open up the space, but you are now stuck in a business model based on sunk cost. And they're fine players and a great user interface and a pleasure to use, so it's not necessarily a bad thing. But what we're going to talk about on this panel today is interoperability. And how many of you actually want to consume content across devices? Watch a movie at home, watch it on your phone, watch it in a hotel room 1,000 miles away, and only pay for it once? Okay, that's good. Okay. And then finally, just a curiosity question, how many of you actually own a Slingbox or think they're cool? Okay. So what we're talking about then is the desire on the part of a large number of people to consume everything, anywhere, all the time, and pay a fair price for it, pay it once. That involves interoperability. The subject of today's discussion is, in fact, interoperability, among other things, and the business models that drive these things. So the first thing, let's get down to the question about standardization. Let's talk a bit about sort of home media center stuff. If we look at the market today, you've got Apple and Fair Play and Windows Media DRM for certain devices and PCs. It appears there's maybe more opportunity in the open field of set-top boxes and appliances for home use, media center stuff. Do we really think that that consumers want to manage a media network within their home? And if they do, what do we think the right way to do that is? And I think what I want to do is open the floor to Henry to talk a little bit about, you don't have to talk a little bit about maybe your vision for how that living room might work and what you think the problems are today.
Okay. I would be happy to. And, one other thing, the way I look at it, I actually really dislike digital rights management as a word or words, because because it's come to mean something exactly opposite to what the words stand for. You know, it's about rights management, but it's come to mean encryption and protection and some, you know, onerous and negative things. And to me, what's very important and what really isn't talked about is the business model. And all business is essentially broken down a simple thing where value passes from a provider to a consumer and money comes back. And so there are two essential players and value transacts. And if the consumer and the provider both benefit, you know, they're both better off. From a technology standpoint, whenever the consumer has gotten a better experience and adopted new technology, revenues to the providers have increased. You know, most prominently in the last 20 or 30 years, that is very evident, particularly in the theatrical film business, where new formats like DVD, new business models like rental, HBO, multiple formats due to new technologies have been released. And every time they have been adopted by the consumers had a much better experience, and the film companies have made a lot more money. And that's factual. Similarly, in the music business, when the CD was introduced, as opposed to the phonograph record, that was very rapidly adopted. And in fact, the consumer had a much better experience, and the content companies made a whole lot more money. It goes back to that single transaction where you have a consumer and a provider, the value is exchanged, the money as exchanged. And I think that is really the key to technology. Technology has to service both sides of that transaction. And so I think the problem today is there's a supposition, particularly on the part of the content companies, that preventing something from happening will get them more money. Okay? I will prevent something, and therefore, by preventing and sort of locking out, I will make more money. I think the value proposition has to be thought through more. And ultimately, if the consumer doesn't get a better experience, you don't get more money. So how do you get a better experience? And to me, looking at the digital lifestyle, the consumer is now able to, and I don't like this word, but use consume content in many more places. You know, it's really impossible before the iPod to really have a good music experience sitting on a noisy plane. You know, so better experience, good business model, more money is made. I think that the future of all media, music included, is about allowing people to use that content where they live and work in a broad fashion. That is a higher value proposition. And I think that also the content can be enhanced and better. One of the issues I think is an anomaly is the fact that as wonderful as the iPod experience is, and as great a technology as compression is, one can argue that it is a worse music experience. The fact of compressing removes some of the experience of the content. Arguable, I, being in the music business, would argue on the side that yes, you're losing something. You know, I much prefer to sit in a room with really great speakers and crank up the amplifier personally than I would listening to my iPod if I could get that kind of experience. If you can get a multi-timbral experience with multiple speakers, and I think the theatrical people have proven that the consumers really like multiple sound sources, that it enhances their viewing experience. Theaters have more speakers to sort of enhance the experience. And so I think that an enhanced consumer experience means a lot more money, and there's a lot that can be done to enhance the consumer's experience, including portability. One of the things that we look at as sort of a risk factor that has prevented a lot of portability is something that I think is fundamental, a fundamental error, problem that gets back to standards in the way the internet developed. There is a supposition, I was just in a forum this morning, that laws need to be changed because technology is different. Okay, the technology is different, and therefore the current laws don't really cover these new technologies. And I think that that is not as much true as is said. I think that a lot of laws actually can, in fact, cover technology. And let me give you a physical use case. You guys are all into Star Trek, okay? Suppose I could clone myself. Exactly. DNA, fingerprints, everything. Okay, and there are now 1,000 or more Henry Juskowitz floating around. Okay, and one of these Henry Juskowitz guys comes into the room, takes out a gun, and shoots the moderator. Okay,
Can we use a different example?
He's dead. Okay. Guy's dead. You know, what is the law going to do? Let's think about that. Or suppose
I said kill them all, just to be sure.
Of course, I would bring them back to life. You know? You're dead. Suppose in another Star Trek scenario that I'm able to put on the cloak of invisibility. Okay, anyone in the world, for a modest fee, can have a cloak of invisibility and be completely unseen and undetected. And so the moderator is sitting up here, and all of a sudden a gun goes off, he falls dead.
I'm dead again.
He's dead again, and we can't see anything. Okay, what does the law do with that?
That's about the time we have for that, sir.
I like killing the moderator, it's very fun. But that is effectively, in a way, the way the internet operates today, where users can't be anonymous. Okay, and all kinds of rogue activity, which the law can't deal with, occur. Is the law wrong? Would you have to change the laws because you have clones and cloaks of invisibility? Or is that process maybe a rogue behavior?
Well,
the fact is, the law depends on identity, okay? And the law says if you do something bad, there are consequences. If I shoot somebody, you know, I don't have the right to be anonymous, okay? And if I restore the balance by removing the cloaks of invisibility and cloning, then the law applies and works. And so there are two fundamental errors in the way the internet operates in our view. One is devices can be anonymous. Not people, but devices can be anonymous, and therefore that defeats a lot of legal principles. And yet, that is not a requirement of technology. That is an architectural issue that can be solved with standards. The second thing is, files are indistinguishable. They're identical clones. And that is also not a requirement of technology. There is a way to individualize files so they have unique identities, and therefore they can acquire ownership and allow ownership rights. And so I think I've probably exhausted my time, and I'll just throw that up as some random thoughts.
Well, you're touching on some areas that are on the list that we're going to do, and I can go there now. In fact, something interesting happened in our prep call where I mentioned identifying consumers across devices to Don, and Don's initial reaction was invasion of privacy. But I think it's possible that he's thought about it a bit and kind of gets what I was saying. And the model that I'm talking about is where you can start watching a movie at home and finish watching it in a hotel room on the other coast because we know who you are. We're not authenticating the box through which you pay. We're authenticating you so we can bill you. And that also lets you have this experience, which some people have been calling multimodal, where you pay for a set of licenses to content and you can consume them on any device. And that's Don's initial response was, I think, a little different, but I'd like to maybe let him speak about how he felt about it that day and what he's been thinking about since. Am I close to?
Yeah, I think you are. We at IBM have done some research on some encryption technology called broadcast encryption, and it's sort of the basis for the encryption for optical media and SD cards that we do in 4C and AACS. And AACS is the content protection for Blu-ray and HD DVD. And I said that alphabetically to be politically correct and not start a debate in 4 minutes. The broadcast encryption, one of the attributes of a broadcast encryption is it does actually take advantage of the fact that there's an encryption key in the end user's box or piece of software, and the content gets bound to that encryption key if it's downloaded or if it comes on prepackaged media. But we've also sort of expanded the content or the concept of broadcast encryption, and this is where I kind of get into what Rick was alluding to there. Is it can be used for networking. A network can include multiple devices. The multiple devices don't have to be persistently attached to the network. And there also is the concept that it can be sort of bound to an individual, or an individual can be identified to move the content around. And it allows content to be, as we were describing, and Rick was describing scenarios, you can take your content or view it wherever you are or for your vacation home or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that what's interesting is that we all come from very different spaces, and in some regards, some of us are from firms that are not positioned as friends of the other firms, and it really depends on who you are. We have certain ideologies and certain business positions in the supply chain that may make us competitors or may make us want to do opposite things. But we all agree you should pay for stuff, and I think we pretty much all agree that identifying the user in some fashion that they can be made comfortable with, whatever that is, will result in more consumption and more ease of use and just a better quality of media consumption for everybody that will change the way we do things. Part of that means that if I'm in place A and I go to place B to watch this on a different device, and I may have an issue because the stuff was encoded with the DRM standard for a specific device, and now I'm on a different device and I can't play it back. In a world in which everybody just did what they were told, we would just figure out what to do and tell everybody to do it. We'd have one standard. That is not what's happening now. We have competing standards. Everybody's fighting for turf. I think maybe there's a good discussion here. We may have our first sort of strong difference of opinion of the day here. I'm going to open the floor to Tom and then Sean to talk a bit about. So we all agree stuff should be standardized. You should work on everything. I think nobody wants to not be able to play what you paid for, right? But the question is whether that standardization occurs through licensing of proprietary technologies or through open standards, which raises the tide for everybody. That's about it. The consumer doesn't care, right? If the price remains the same for them and stuff just works, they don't care at all. We care a lot. So, Tom, I'll give you the floor first, and we'll transfer over to Sean after a little bit, and I'll step in if you guys get rough.
No. Sean Wagner, correct. I think that the issue of having standards for interoperability, there were efforts put forth within international standards bodies to produce ways of common methods for achieving protection systems and for sharing of rights information, in particular the MPEG process. There have been other standards that have come up through organizations like the Open Mobile Alliance and trying to come up with standards for mobile phone interoperability. These are all efforts that my company has participated in to varying degrees. We not build products, but want to see good standards come out. And you know, a difficult problem came up along the way is we got an awful lot of different standards that perhaps implement some of the same technologies, and that interoperability has become an afterthought because a lot of DRM systems have become a way of creating or collecting a market and a way of maintaining that market. And interoperability has come up much more of late. And so where I think we've been driven by feedback from our customers has been, you know, geez, this ought to be, in a lot of ways, the whole DRM market is a lot like the way the internet came up. And the CompuServe internet portals, CompuServe and AOL of the early days are kind of like the Apple and the Place for Sure markets of today. And that what you really need to do is get away from proprietary islands of interoperability and move towards, you know, standardized markup language, standardized transfer protocols, flatten the world out, make it safe for everyone to be building compatible, interoperable systems by design as opposed to through the exchange of licensing agreements and lots of money.
And you believe that, I'll paraphrase, but I think you tell me if that's the case. You believe that in a market in which you provide that to people at no charge or whatever, no major license fee, that there's money to be made in the increased consumption somehow.
Absolutely. I think if you look at the way internet technologies in general and web services in particular have developed, there was some of these technologies, in particular what the WC3 has come up with. These are royalty-free, open standards, HTML, HTTP, these sorts of technologies that we all depend upon for the internet were contributed for the most part as non-compensated or royalty-free technologies to the industry, and you can't point at a single company that has benefited the most necessarily, but you can point at an entire ecosystem of the world that has benefited from these technologies. And it goes back to, by it being a widely adopted, incredibly low to zero barriers to entry, the tide rises for all.
And potentially maybe your ability to be sticky with customers and make more money is based on adding value in other ways, aside from locking them in. And by the way, I think we all understand that not only is there an issue where contents are incompatible, but also the licensing for the user doesn't allow reverse engineering, so they can't reverse engineer the content and transcode it themselves. That would be technically piracy, so that there has to be agreement upstream to provide the content multiple formats or do something else. Sean, can you articulate a position on, I'm guessing that you'll be coming from the position that people have invented these things, they need to be compensated for them, and they're great technologies. But I've never heard you speak, so I think you're wrong.
Well, I mean, Antitrust has been around for a long time, and they have a substantial IPR portfolio in the, I guess you could say, the rights management or secure computing space. What they do and what we do now is specifically, and what I like to discuss is two areas, specifically two standardization efforts that we're pushing quite hard. One is called Coral, and Coral started several years ago. There's two ways of having interoperability. One way is the way two companies that you might be aware of, Navio and Rio, do it. And they do it in a different architecture, but essentially it's the same way. They're both ways. There's a central container, either on the client or the server. And depending on the device, the end device, whether it's an iPod or like your PC with Windows Media or something else with Rio or whatever, it will transform the content and add the DRM on the server of the client in order to provide it to that device so that you can consume it, basically. And it still be secure so that the content provider can release it to them to sell, essentially. That's the way it's been done, kind of like, it's released and there's a central container. Coral is developed, and now it's actually a consortium of over 45 companies. All the major content providers are in there. Most of the major technology companies are in there too. What it provides is the ability to transform the content as well as the DRM based on the device and what you want to consume it in. so that you can have interoperability and still have what we call verticals. So you could have a proprietary Windows Media solution, and you could have a FairPlay solution, and you could actually take the content from FairPlay and move it over to Windows Media on a different device while maintaining the protection. And it's a standard, basically. So it's published, people can look at it, they can specify, they can develop products or services based on it. And that's core.
And in that process, if you have a FairPlay file and you pass it through Carl to convert it to something else, are you post-processing it after it's already been encrypted into FairPlay format?
Well, it depends, but you can do it a number of different ways.
But if you do it, so I guess my question is, if you do that and you do it downstream, do you believe that Apple's okay with that?
Well, it depends on the license that Apple provides or if they participate in that. Logically, usually you can't unencrypt something that's already been encrypted. But if someone participates, and I participate, like a number of OMA and other companies who provide DRM solutions do, Call, for example, if they permit their stuff to get unencrypted on the network side or on the client side and be transferred over, then there's no problem.
Okay. So I'm going to open this up to the audience as well, see if we can maybe get one person who has a point of view on whether they, and by the way, please don't be a vendor of one or the other, but whether they have a preference for arriving at compatibility through open royalty-free standards or through proprietary means, and maybe can articulate a position. You don't have to do this. Okay. We have two. I'm going to go with you back there, blue shirt.
Right. So
do we have are you guys doing a portable microphone for these guys? Okay, I'll do it.
So my observation is that there are two kinds of standards, right? There's a de facto standard, there's a de jure standard. If you look at the industry, we all already know about the DRM. Certainly it's a industry type standard. But if you look at the actual adaptation that the masses out there that are using, then you look at Windows as the prevailing standard and continue to look. So what's your approach between the jure standards and de facto standards in light of the reality that we have out there?
That's an interesting question.
Yeah, you restated before you answer.
So the question is between Windows Media and OMA, for example, how's it going to develop, or where do we see, well, Coral was developed specifically to handle such interoperability issues where you have two different, which you call standards or proprietary versions. OMA we consider a standard because it's openly published how to interoperate. With DRM from Microsoft, you only get an SDK essentially. You don't get the source, and you can't modify it. The way to take the content between the two would be handled by something like Coral. The other thing that I was going to discuss is Marlin. Marlin is a new consortium. It was started by Intertrust, Philips, Sony, Samsung, and Panasonic, essentially, to develop another standard around DRM, so that to allow for different types of wireless and wireline devices to interoperate to provide content. Now, when you talk about Windows Media, DRM, it's an interesting topic to talk about because Microsoft always comes up in these areas. But from my impression of the market outside the United States and in general around devices, you look at the PC market, you're talking about addressable software market, basically. You put some software on there, you can do whatever you want. Talk about devices, that's a whole different picture. It's a different ball of wax. Talk about devices, typically the only successful things that have ever been implemented in devices have been standards. And by standards, open interoperable standards that work throughout, like MP3, like TCP/IP, like HTTP, like a lot of other things. But essentially, you can't really, in like the GSM space that we all utilize for mobile phones, even CDMA, can't point to a single company who has a proprietary implementation that's been successful in doing anything, protocol or anything else. And that's because we believe that standards are very important in these areas. Look at Microsoft in the device space. I don't see them. I really don't see. We haven't seen them in general. We haven't seen them as being successful at all. There's not a single service provider who uses them on the device side for DRM for IPTV. Codec side, we don't see them really anywhere except inside the United States, anywhere. We don't see them in iPods, don't use Microsoft. They're the most successful for music. Video is all using MPEG-4. MPEG-2 is everything that you consume and see in general. All the stuff on YouTube is using Onto. It's not Microsoft. And all the other devices in general have been successful. Mobile space, OSs, they have 1% of the market overall out of 900 million handsets. They sold 9 million last year. We don't see them.
I'm not sure you're entirely right about the IPTV stuff. I think that there are Microsoft deployments in place or rolling out now in which there is Windows Media.
Can you name one?
If I knew about it, I couldn't name it because if we're working on it.
Then I don't say that they're done.
I can come over there.
I can name 300 that have been, and they don't use it.
Well, people, we're not here to talk about IPTV very much today, but yeah, in fact, you're the next person I call on from the audience, but let me get through something. Different vendors are entering the IPTV market at different speeds but because of the adoption of their technology, and for a player that comes from outside that space, it can be difficult. Something to think about when you think about device compatibility, though, is from the sort of venerable cable business, and that is, anybody here familiar with Simulcrypt? Show of hands. Simulcrypt is a great thing because it proves that properly designed content protection can, in fact, be adhering to a standard. A lot of the DRM guys will tell you that we can't tell you how our stuff works or the pirates will steal it, and that means they never went to cryptography 101. Simulcrypt basically made all the CAS vendors of the day in the late 80s, early 90s conform to a standard to reduce or eliminate the switching cost for the cable guys. So if they want to switch boxes and vendors and DRM methods, boom, same stream, different box, run it through a piece of standardized hardware, and out comes a stream that can be consumed by that box. That's a beautiful thing. We don't have that for this kind of content today.
Let me just make a comment. It's actually, there is two standards that are coming that are inspired by Simulcrypt, and in particular there's DCAS, which is coming from Cable Labs, and there's the open DCAS coming from ATIS Telco World. So they both followed the same inspiration. And the trouble is even in Simulcrypt it's a open standardized interface to plug in your proprietary implementation.
Well, people have to make money. But it does, what that did to that industry is it caused people to have to compete based on other things. Sir, I'll let you comment now.
Yeah, my name is Michael Wallace. I'm the CEO of SDC. We have the second patent holders in the industry from 1994. I think we only currently actually 8% of the DRM market in the mobile market today. And I want to come back to the standards. So we discussed the speed thing a couple of times. I have Common, Marlin, OMA, Green, whatever kind of standard. I think there are two issues for that standardization committees, and which is first that the IP holders, the trusted one, STC one, there might be something like we want to give us IP for free. Why should we? Firstly. Secondly, if I want to buy into Carloshan, I have to give you my
mobile standard. And I'm watching content that I've already paid for on my device lawfully. And everybody who I'm using to get from my house to here is becoming a non-value added pipe. And because they didn't come to market, my carrier doesn't have a reasonable entertainment content delivery method that works for me yet. So I'm watching content that I'm enjoying, and nobody's monitoring my customer behavior. I'm not getting ads. I'm not paying a premium. And if enough people adopt that, then the market changes dramatically. So as you said, I think, to paraphrase you, we need to provide the market with what they want. And if standards work and people can get around them, fine. I think Mark might have, I want to ask you a question about, so Mark is in the content supply chain business, right? He takes content in and transcodes it and provides it for different target devices, different formats. And so he's living, I think, today with a problem of multiplicity, where the more devices he has to support, the more methods he has to support, and the content can't play across devices.
Yeah, it's really it's an interesting piece of the puzzle. The short term is everybody wants to find some interoperability with their DRM solutions and be able to get their content out. But in the short term, it's you got Windows Media, you have your Apple Fair Play. You have your Coral and your Marlin. You have all those different formats, and for us, it's up to manage that and make sure you have that in a format available for every single cell phone, every single portable device, every single Windows Media device that or computer. It does become unwieldy to manage that, but right now that's kind of the spot that you have to be in order to get your content out there, because at the end of the day, DRM, you want to protect your content, but saying you want to protect you want to monetize it, your content. So, and DRM's good for that, but until we come up with some way to find some sort of standardization, I look at sharing your DRM and keeping it as an open system. It ultimately comes to a very, very real ability to crack it, and we've already seen that happening with Windows Media. We've seen that. I'm not sure what's happening with Coral, or if there's been any compromises inside the Coral system, but the more you can keep your DRM, I think, more proprietary and more specific to you, whether that's something you build yourself or you use something off the shelf, but you supply the key and the salt to generate those keys. I think that's where DRM really has to step up.
And right now, when you want to support multiple platforms, you just basically have to replicate content?
Absolutely. You transcode, you get your master file that comes in. You have to get it encoded in the right format, which is a challenge in itself, because every cell phone has different formats, and there's a certain way you've got to encode Windows Media, VC1, H.264. They're all unwieldy, and so you not only have to manage that, but then now you have to manage the rights as well.
Yeah,
and then
different formats.
And everybody has different ways they want it managed. Some people want a silent license. Some people want to, charge $1. Some people want to charge $1 million. There's so many different methodologies that are out there.
In a way, though, that creates an opportunity for you
Absolutely.
as supply chain middleman, because you can spread the cost of that multiplicity across multiple customers, right?
Yeah, it is, absolutely. It's a good business model to be in the center. And that's why building out the networks and being able to get the content directly into the networks by privately peering into those networks also takes a load off the delivery of that content into those networks.
I've got some people queued up to talk. I just wait 1 second. I also want Jonathan to know that he is going to be next after we go through these things, because the subject matter that we have lined up for him is really, I think, very interesting. In order of people that sort of waved at me, you, sir?
Right. Absolutely, and that's one of the things that we've looked at and said, hey, if we're controlling the raw asset, or not me being Dream Tank or my company, but you as the content provider with it inside of my system, you're ultimately controlling that raw asset. Then you decide how you want to move that media, what solution you want to use. I try to stay agnostic, even though I hate that word. I try to stay agnostic in that process. Yeah.
Well, I can kind of speak to that briefly. I mean, as the moderator, I'm probably not supposed to present an opinion, but what the heck? I got the microphone. We as a firm are looking at the supply chain business as well, and I think that the best thing to do in that space, which is where you are, is BSS-related stuff, where you can provide this clearinghouse integration point and help people sort out their billing and their upstream royalties and participation fees and their downstream licenses. Once you get through all that, the analogy that I use is the cell phone business. How many of you had a cell phone in like 1990? Do you remember those bills? You would drive like 30 miles and get 10 pieces of paper in the mail at the end of the month from every little region you drove through. That was a lack of BSS and back-end aggregation. So even once we sort out the DRM compatibility issues, there's still a matter of who gets paid and whose keys do you have, and whose pipes did you use, and how does everybody get a slice of this so we can all stay in business. That is complex to think about, when you think about it, but it's actually fairly ordinary business system back-end stuff, industrial strength stuff. We just have to get the players to agree to be willing to do it. Sean?
Well, I just wanted to make a point of clarification. What if I was to tell you that Coral, guys, it's not an encryption format. It's not a DRM. It's just a way of communicating, basically. Rights. So, Mike, you don't have to give any source code away.
But you have to share it. But you have to share your.
Well, that's That's between you and the service provider, but not in Coral, actually. So that's a decision that has to be done independently. But you provide your source code to device manufacturers and different people all the time, or you don't. Well, then you can't really be a standard then. But anyway, the thing is that it's really like TCP/IP. It's a way of securely connecting between different DRMs. But the DRMs can be completely proprietary. All it's really doing is transferring the rights and transferring the content in a secure way and allowing people to transform it if that right is given in between. But the whole idea is to make it easier for that to happen.
And so far we've all been talking really amazingly about the same things, coming from different perspectives, but we all want stuff to work across all devices. We all want the currency people use to be tied to their identity and the rights they may have. And we all want whatever billing or charging there is that occurs to be appropriate, fair, and not redundant. And I mean, that's a great thing, because what we have is a point in time where people in the industry are sharing a vision.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. I think one of the questions you were asking, particularly about like the common military idea example, is one of the things that we're looking at, and it's a big problem to go solve, which is managing your rights through a federated rights approach. So rather than, in much the same way that there are deployed federated identity management systems out there, you go to one website, you sign on there, you can take your identity to the next one, and then they privately can, on the back end, confirm your identity among themselves without having to. You want that same model with your rights. If I go and I buy through Vodafone, and then I buy through Time Warner, and I buy different things, but I'm only connected through Vodafone, there should be a way for me to get my rights conveyed to me in the proper way. So that is something that we're looking at very closely, and if you actually go into the identity management community, independent of Sun, the identity management community, they're already talking about using rights federation as a way of extending, identity federation as a way of extending rights models.
Right, and I think that's fantastic. One of my peers and colleagues at Accenture is really strong into identity management, loves your stuff, for instance. And there are anecdotes about people in the entertainment space who are using your enterprise identity management system to authenticate consumers, which sounds good on paper, but is really, really hard. And because it's not designed for that kind of scale. So a little later on in this conversation, if we could possibly loop back, if you can say anything about anything you can talk about with identity management for consumers, scaled for tens or hundreds of millions of people. That would be interesting. If you can, that's cool too.
Yeah. I mean, actually, we've heard that question before, and it already does scale into the tens of millions of users, because it's used in, for example, cable deployments and such. Mm-hmm. And the expectation, when you get to doing, like ECM, EMM sort of, mm-hmm. Fine-grained transactions, then you need a different type of scale than if you're doing single sign-on for 10 million.
Yeah, it's a transaction speed thing. Yeah, exactly. So we're going to switch topic a little bit, but this is a really very interesting thing. In our discussion on the phone and subsequent email discussion, we talked to Jonathan about sort of where their business was and where it is, and it's what's interesting about what he's going to talk about is it's not so closely tied to the cross-platform stuff that we're talking about here, but it does have ties to new ways of selling things to people and new ways of marketing things to people, which is really interesting to this whole community anyway. So I wanted to get that out there. Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Sure. I think what our moderator is getting at is the company I work with is about 6 years old. And I'd say for the first 5 years, all of our customers who are the content owners has been, let's catch these guys, let's screw them up. We've had studio executives come in here and be like, well, can you send them a virus? Can you send them something that'll blow up their computers? And of course they're joking. Maybe some weren't joking, and obviously we said, no, we can do that, but we won't do that, and we're going to go get arrested ourselves. And so, over the years, building out this infrastructure to send decoys, to send spoofs, to intercept pirated content on these peer-to-peer networks. We've, for the longest time, said, hey, we're sending these decoys. We could send legitimate files, demos, trials, DRM wrap content. And for the most part, the content owners have not until this last year, for the most part, they had not wanted to do that. They couldn't really touch the peer-to-peer. Post MGM, Rockster, things have really changed, and we're getting very positive feedback in terms of, let's try and capture some of these, instead of viewing them just as pirates, potential customers, consumers. Let's try and convert some of these. And so what we've seen, especially this last year, quite a bit of is using peer-to-peer as a means to distribute, as a means to market. So it presents to us quite a unique opportunity in the sense that there's no guesswork involved. Like, you know exactly what this, whatever you want to call it, pirate / consumer / potential customer, you know exactly what they're looking for. They're not, it's not guesswork in terms of, oh, I think this person likes hip-hop, or I think this person likes classic rock. It's very clear this person is looking for the newest Eminem track or the newest Coldplay album. It's very clear. They type it in. And so we can market to them. And what we've seen so far, what we've tried to work with some of our content owners in doing is, there's one way where we can send out real content and try to, grab some advertising revenue out of it, either attach some kind of little commercial or some kind of thing, or do a redirection to a website. And one of the things that we want to get to is, the DRMs do come to standard whatnot. I'm not a DRM expert or anything like that, but we feel like we've got this huge platform to distribute and an opportunity to distribute very specifically. We can push real content, and it's something in this last year that we've been experimenting with. We've had a lot of successful experiments. We haven't made too much money yet just because we're still trying to figure out exactly how it's all going to work. But I would say by and large this last year, a lot of our customers are excited about, okay, we got 10 million concurrent users on peer-to-peer networks. What is that, in aggregate, what is that, 100 million? We're not really sure, but we know it's a big number. And it's an exciting place that we're looking at. Of course, our company is still called Media Defender, but we are looking at these alternatives.
Yeah, the name doesn't really scream sales or anything, but and it's actually in the digital advertising world, the CRM kind of stuff. It's not all guesswork, of course. There's complex analytics behind it. We have a pretty good idea what people want. But yeah, you're right. Correlating that with a specific request, and you've got a lot. And I think that's fascinating, and I'm really glad to see people moving in that direction. I think that makes a lot of sense rather than just criminalizing them and giving them broken files that sound awful. What we have, I think, my clock says we have 20 minutes left. I don't know if that's right. I'm going to assume it is. It just keeps going. What I think I'd like to do is go down the panel left to right and basically give everybody a 2-sentence soundbite to discuss what they think the most significant DRM and DRM/commerce related event of the past year, even 2 years, reach back if you want to, and then we'll open it to the audience and do some interaction. So, Don?
I guess from my point of view, it's something that doesn't have anything to do with what I do personally, and I think that's the success of the Apple system, the iTunes and iPod, and it's sort of, I guess, maybe verification that if there is a very friendly consumer value statement, that consumers will pay for protected content.
Yeah, there's a market out there. Henry?
Well, one thing we're looking at very closely is the new high-definition discs. And the reality is there's a lot of stuff in there, and it's an ecosystem approach. So in our view, it's a pretty good approach, and it isn't about a single DRM. It's about an entire business model that includes some pretty robust DRMs that are standardized.
And just as an opportunity for you to talk just for just a second about
You're involved. Most of you are probably involved in pieces of it. It is something that offers the consumer a wonderful, better experience. Now that's arguable, but most people are going for high-definition screens. Most people go for some format of high-definition content because it enhances their viewing experience. There's been a lot of work being done in the protection of that content. And to me, it's a wonderful example of an ecosystem developing because it took different industries and different players to sort of agree to that, and it is in fact it's a standard.
I'm on the other end of the extreme. I'm watching my content 320 by 240, so everything looks good to me. I don't want to watch HD. I'll like it too much. Sean?
If I could just add to what Henry was saying, though, I'm sorry. Access is the content protection for the high definition discs, and we've tried very hard to maybe take a lesson from the Apple experience and add some new business model enablement aspects to that spec. It's not just an encryption. It also allows whole new ways to get content and experience content. So we've tried to add to that and help along with that as we've spent 4 years working on it.
Sean, what's the coolest thing in your mind in the past 12 to 24 months?
Well, I think what the coolest thing has been really the standardization as to some of the formats for IPTV as well as for iPod, for example, and for basically all types of media, even DVD, for example. They all seem to be coalescing around either MPEG-2 or MPEG-4. And I think in general everyone would agree with that. And those are very, I would say, relatively open standards that have a high degree of interoperability. And I think it's natural in that way that DRM is going to go down the same route in the future. And we're going to see interoperability for DRM the same way we see it for digital formats.
Well, you know what? You missed the call and some of the subsequent chatter because Talal was on it and you got substituted in after. But the quote that came up was that, you know, MP3 is a great example potentially of how DRM ought to work, right? It just plays on everything. And in a world where DRM protected formats work the way MP3 does today on any device you buy anywhere, that would be a really cool world because then you could get somebody a player for Christmas without wondering what format their collection is in.
Or what player they got.
Right, exactly. Tom?
So I guess the comment I wanted to make was that, you know, when we look at, and Sean was just describing how the standards of MPEG, if we turn the clock back about 4 or 5 years, we'd have been sitting here discussing, is the world going to be a VC1 world or is it going to be an AVC video format world? And that all occurred because, you know, even though the MPEG process had produced a very high quality standard, you know, the patent issues got in the way of the standard, and the only reason we dodged that bullet was because the alternatives were equally encumbered in that space. And I think, you know, if I look at my own company and the reasons why we're interested and involved in some of the aspects of DRM now, it has everything to do with the fact that the standards world, whether it's OMA or MPEG 21 or other places, went out doing standards, and then at the end of the standards process, and I would say that most of these international standards processes and consortia are broken because they're driven through the monetization of the intellectual property as opposed to the goal of being in the market to deliver products and solutions. And that's where the standardization process got broken. The people who drove MPEG-2 in particular, which we all know and love as the basis of so many successful products and solutions, that got lost as people started to focus on the end game of creating patent pools and monetizing that and restricting what's going on. So I think as much as you know, there's great DRM solutions that are out there from, you know, just about anyone I would care to cite, I think that the trouble is, in what we need to do is in order to have massive adoption and massive deployment, you need to mow down some of these solutions and get people to agree, much like we got a single SGML standard for the internet and a single transfer protocol for those SGML documents. I think when we can get away from everyone gets the opportunity to monetize their intellectual property and instead worry about there being a bigger market opportunity for many more people, things will get a lot more interesting.
I'm going to assume that was 2 sentences. No, I was dramatically wrong about it. I didn't hear any punctuation, no. I was dramatically wrong about how much time we have left. We have 5 left, so I do want Jonathan and Mark to have a chance, and then we'll see how long we can do questions so they throw us out. Jonathan?
I think it came up in our phone call that we had that DRM has historically this very negative, constraining feel to it, whereas it's actually, you know, if it gets done right, it should be enabling and empowering to even consumers.
takes.
I think that's exciting. We've seen that, especially in what I just shared at our company. Anti-piracy was the negative, we got to stop them, to now it's no longer just a cost structure. I mean, now we get to talk to the profit centers. And it's funny, you get the different personality types, not just the tight ones that want to protect everything, but the kind of more colorful personalities.
Well, you know what? I think that sentence there deserves like a 10-second golf clap. Come on, you can do it. Because that's a tremendous attitude shift. That's a tremendous attitude shift, and it's the right thing. We're enabling commerce. Mark?
It's funny. I founded the Anti-Piracy League, and not that I look at piracy completely different. I think one of the most exciting things that has come out of looking at DRM is, and this is what's really cool, is that if you start looking at it as a marketing opportunity, it's huge. Whether it's on peer-to-peer, whether it's on MySpace, or whether it's on YouTube, if you take something that's viral and you and you truly have something that's viral and you wrap some DRM around it, and that thing points you to a spot called, if it's like my company, it's at the dreamtank.com/Mark, and you can start to see where it's going, and it's out there, and it's phoning home back to you and saying, it's like the website, where's that dollar bill? It's phoning back home and says, this person who has an IP address that's in Amsterdam is now at my site.
Where's George?
Where's George? Thank you.com. Not me. But I think that's what the most exciting thing is that people are using DRM as a marketing tool to actually drive traffic to things that can potentially make them money, and reselling things. But if it's not the content, they're reselling merchandise and using Cafe Press, or they're selling a T-shirt, or they're selling a mug, or they're saying, hey, buy this DVD, and they're actually selling a physical good. I think that's the most exciting thing I've seen in DRM in the last 12 months.
Does anybody out there want to pick a fight with us?
Come on.
Please.
Can I make a comment? One of the things I think I'd like to point out is that Apple's an intermediary. Apple doesn't own content, okay? And I get back to my initial statement that commerce is about the provider and the consumer, and a lot of the noise is actually in intermediaries. Apple, in the way they're operating, is actually a retailer, okay? And what it points out is a lack of leadership on the content side, because if the content guy said, you know what, we're not going to, Steve, thanks a lot, the contract's up, we're not going to sell you anymore, we're not going to sell anybody that doesn't use Scheme Coral, okay? We own the stuff, and we say that's the way we're going to go, okay? They have actually the ability to do that, and of course that's a fictitious scenario because it'd be more complex than that. But the reality is there's been no leadership, and there isn't a direct line between provider and consumer. And there's a lot of intermediaries with vested interests that are sort of getting in the mix that are complicating things in a worse fashion for both ends. That's the true end-to-end, is provider and consumer.
Right, and we actually call that, we have a word for that, we call it DEET, digital end-to-end. And that's all about the studios and their relationship with the consumers. And there are always going to be middlemen who get in the way. I mean, in the old days, it was the guys who had factories and trucks and moved plastic around to make discs. Now it's the people who've established a position in the value chain. But all that's temporary. It's all Darwinistic. The consumer's going to drive the truth into that. And what's going to change a lot of that behavior is fear. When somebody feels their market share slipping away, they'll all of a sudden agree to things that they wouldn't have otherwise agreed to, and that's the nature of disruption. And if anybody hasn't read Christensen's books, you really should, because it's great. It shows that when you're on top is exactly when they take you out of the picture. Anybody else? You, sir, red shirt.
I'll handle that. It's right now, if you really want just ease of use, and this is a lot of things that people could come to us. They say, I'm a brick and mortar company. I've got DVDs. I understand how to get them to to a distributor and get them out. But how do if I just want to have a site online where I can monetize my video and do a VOD solution, what is it? And really, the best thing right now is to utilize a Windows Media type solution. And then there's third-party companies out there that have expanded the DRM solutions and really made them robust. If I can recommend a few to you that do it. And you get your site up. Once your site's up and you package your content and you set your own price points, again, ET phones home. It comes home and asks you how much you want to charge to watch this content. So I would stick with Microsoft and their DRM for right now. Yeah, online. Well, yeah, if you go wireless, that's a whole. It's a can of worms, exactly. Because once you go mobile, then yeah. If you're going to go mobile and go wireless, then there's other solutions you want to use. And again, I mean, that goes to the core of why we started doing what we did. There's just so many ways to get your content out there, and how do you sift through the noise, and what's the most effective, and what's the best way to monetize it.
Sean, you have
Well, it really. Sorry, just
get closer to the mic, please.
I completely. Well, okay, I'll bring it closer. It really depends on the channel.
Yeah.
That you want to go through. That's what it boils down to. I mean, if you use DVDs, they got their own encryption format, right? That's a separate channel. If you want to use a different type of format or a different area, you can go maybe through as a podcast or through iTunes. Or it doesn't matter. It just depends on the channel, and each channel has its own way of protecting that content if it can be protected.
But you can't lock down the iTunes unless you get approved through iTunes because it's a closed system.
Exactly. And Windows Media, from an SDK perspective, is open that anyone can actually implement it on the PC side.
Right.
If you're talking about devices like mobile, it's a different channel. You want to get to a lot of addressable devices. It depends. You can use SDC.
Right.
Or you can use OMA, for example. There's different, it depends on the number of devices. It's a lot of different issues. That doesn't mean you have to invest in it. You can outsource it, like
right.
typically most people do. The companies that do handle that stuff. The idea of interoperability is the idea that you're not going to have to think about that stuff in the future.
Good peripheral vision, very nice. I wanted to give you guys one more opportunity to really sort of create controversies. Anybody out there have a statement to make that's just going to really piss us off?
Take a crack at it, and I'm not sure I'm competent to answer it.
Oh, please do.
You know, I think that rights holders in entertainment, for decades are going to go for as much money as they can get. It's a negotiating issue. And one of the problems I see is anytime you say technology has eliminated the way we've done business in the past, it's a gold rush. Everybody's looking for more, It's about, it was 5 cents a song, but that doesn't work anymore. So what is it? Well, I want $3 now. And so I think the more that we can duplicate the historically complex balance that's achieved, if you look at royalty rates and legislation for copyrights and union contracts. There's all these players in entertainment. It's a really complex web. And at one point in time, you reach an equilibrium where everybody's equally unhappy, you know, with what they're getting. That is so precious that if you move off of that position, you have true disruption because you have a land rush. And so the more technology can support sort of the historical structures, which it more often than not can do. Okay, I mean, there are edge examples where something is so totally new that, you know, the old equilibrium doesn't work. But more often, the old equilibrium can work if the technology supports it. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I want to just comment that I mean, I think that the technology to deal with that particular issue that you're describing, and, you know, whether they're phoning home or, you know, doing detailed transaction accounting for, is there in just about any DRM you would care to mention. And I think what's missing is the counterbalance to that, which is the competition. So if, for example, a solution like Apple they only have one way to go, your switching cost to go to a competitive alternative, you know, a different price for that technology from a consumer's perspective isn't there. That your cost to switch or have choice is not there. So it's basically, the technology is somewhat stagnant. You're not getting the accounting. If you want 5 cents a song or $3 a song, you might want that, but it's the market that decides the price. And at the moment, you don't really have market forces at play in determining price and what the
you kind of do.
I don't think it's the market. I think it's more complicated. You know, the market didn't determine royalty rates on copyrights. It's a highly complex, highly negotiated.
But peer-to-peer file sharing networks are having pressure on that, and so there's your counterbalance.
So what are the rates the radio station pay for ASCAP? You know, what market determined that? You know, it was not a market factor, and it's not that simple. And anytime you defeat these very complex negotiated, some cases it is market, other cases it's not, it's union negotiation and so forth. Anytime you defeat this very complex mix of rules, you have problems. And so the best way to maintain equilibrium is to try to maintain those rules, unless there are areas where that can't be done, and then you have to go through what sometimes took decades.
Well, and those rules apply to a specific context, right, in terms of maybe purchasing the music. So maybe what you do is think orthogonally, break the paradigm, I hate that word, but break the paradigm and move to the rental model, right? Instead of, I'm not selling you the song, I'm renting you 2 million songs for $5.99 a month. And then, so you're not buying them, so I'm outside that restriction, and there's your competitive pressure. Those business models, those all-you-can-eat rental models, haven't really taken off the way some of us had hoped, but I'm a believer in them. I don't actually want to own anything, I just want to be able to listen to everything.
Yeah, but his point is, like, if you do that, how much is Harry Fox getting? Okay, now you're selling that song and renting it for a lot less than Harry Fox would get if you sold that as a hard copy. And so now, what's the new royalty rate?
It's found money, though.
Right. Well, you know, tell that to Harry Fox.
Hey,
Have
Harry,
you dealt with those guys?
Harry, it's found money.
You're going to take less, but it's fine. You're going to really like it.
So do I read you right? We have one more question. All right. This is great. We keep getting time extensions. One more. Anybody? Somebody.
Yeah. So because one has some controversial. What do you think? Do you think it would be possible that you're in arena where everyone is fighting to get the royalties and standardize? Do you think it's possible that like a site that will come out and just be like well we have this either completely open or completely closed solution. This is only coming factor standard, and there it is. Do you think it's possible? If it's not possible, why?
Well, I just got the timeout cue, but I'm going to leave you with a sentence, and that is the nature of disruption. It's whom you least expect that might own the market. It's not the big guys, it's not anybody you've ever heard of. While everybody's busy fighting over who gets a slice of the existing pie, somebody comes along with a new method. And that's the way the world works.
Clearinghouse. That's where I see, you're thinking clearinghouse. If you could do a clearinghouse where you clear the music for Napster and Apple and you join, Napple, And you can have both WMA files and was it AC3 files. That'd be a disruptor right there. He who controls the raw asset and can put it into its formats is going to have a better chance at gaining market share.
What I'd like to ask the panel is, why don't we get off stage and go outside the door and have people throng around us there so the next guys can. And thank you.